Hello, my name is Quincy McGee, and today I'd like to present to you my proposal to change Taters Incorporated's operating system structure. Today we're running on Windows XP, which has since stopped receiving security updates and can't really take advantage of the new resources that computers have to offer. As we'll see on the next slide here, I have a couple of objectives that I'd like to go through. I'd like to first go over the cost and some of the hurdles of upgrading to Windows 10 from Windows XP. Then I'd like to get into a little bit of the Linux Mint Cinnamon operating system and some of its advantages. I'd actually like to give you a demonstration of Linux Mint, some of the concerns that I found regarding the operating system, and finally a summarization of what we've learned here today. So first, your Windows hurdles. Um, the Taters amount of workstations alone would make Windows 10 quite an expensive upgrade. Research shows that just the home version of Windows costs around $119, whereas the professional version costs around $199. So you typically have to multiply that number by however many workstations that you have, and as you can see, that gets expensive quite quickly. If we take the number of hosts that Taters has today and multiply that by even the cheapest version of Windows, which is $119, the total comes up to around $38,244. Now, on the other hand, Mint Cinnamon is virtually free. It's open source, so a lot of the upgrades and things that have to happen to Linux Mint are actually open source. So if there's any security updates, those are worked on by third parties, and there's not a lot of costs incurred when it comes to upgrades as well. Staying with Windows 10 would also keep Taters basically in a perpetual need to have some type of Windows in order to use volume licensing. The main hiccup there is that you actually can't upgrade to Windows 10 from Windows XP. And also, while a single core should run Windows 10, it probably will run it poorly. As you'll see as we get to the updates on um, Linux Mint, you'll see that the requirements to run that operating system are much lower than typical Windows 10 setup. Now, the other thing that I saw that may be an issue is host compatibility when we go back to what we have available at Taters today. So the first thing that stuck out was the Toshiba single core stations. Again, while they may run Windows 10, it probably won't be very well based on the amount of cores that are not available for Windows 10. We also have 4 gigabytes of RAM in each station. While that will run Windows 10, typically most people are saying that you should probably have around 8 gigabytes of RAM to run Windows 10. So now we look at some of the Linux Cinnamon advantages. First is its ease of installation. I'd say it rivals, most Windows operating systems in terms of, the ease of installation. It was pretty seamless. You get a couple of choices that you can make, while you're setting it up, but mostly it just installs pretty simply after that. You'll see on the next page it has low system requirements, way lower than Windows 10. And that would actually leave us a lot more resources left over to utilize with the hosts that we have today. There's a large support community. We could say the same for Windows 10, but again, with Linux being open source, there's a lot more support available free of cost, actually. The main reason I chose Linux Cinnamon was its similarities to Windows in terms of its interface. Once we get to the demo portion, I'll point out some of the similarities that there is between Cinnamon and Windows. It's pretty easy to make changes to Linux as opposed to Windows 10. So this basically gives a comparison of the requirements that would be needed to run each operating system. Both of these operating systems are 64-bit. As we can see, Windows 10 requires at least a 1 gigahertz processor, whereas Linux Mint only requires that the processor be 64-bit. Windows 10 comes in at 2 gigabytes of RAM needed minimal to run it, whereas Linux Mint only needs 512 megabytes of RAM. Windows also requires 16 gigabytes of your disk space just to install it, whereas Linux Mint only requires 9 gigabytes. So as you can see, we're already a little bit ahead of the game here, and that Linux Mint doesn't require as many resources initially to get going. For the must-have applications for the company, I chose these 5 based on some of the tasks that the company would need to do day to day. We have Google Chrome, and I chose that mostly because it has a built-in translator. We have Tomboy, and I picked this because it's a great way to take notes and easily organize them into their own virtual notebook. Mozilla Thunderbird, this is a great email client. Can be set up to handle all of Taters' email needs, and we can actually point that to our email server if needed. We have LibreOffice, and in my opinion, this is basically a clone of Microsoft Office. And once we get into the demo portion of that, you'll see how similar that is. And I feel that would make it quite easy for the staff today to pick up using those applications, being that it's quite similar to what they use in Windows XP today. And finally, the backup tool, just to do periodic backups to make sure all of our files are secured and safe, and that if in the event something were to happen, we would have copies of those files to back up from. I did spot 2 concerns with Linux Mint in doing my research. And the first I found was there seems to be some hardware compatibility issues. These don't run rampant. They were actually quite small, but the main one that I was able to point out was some of the newer NVIDIA video cards. The drivers don't seem to cooperate well with Linux Mint. So in the event that this comes up for us, we would need to probably look into some type of third-party driver to ensure that our video cards continue to function as they should. The second thing I found was that some updates are blacklisted. Linux Mint does have some instances where they have blacklisted some updates. So in the event that we have, an update that's blacklisted that's pertinent to our corporation, we would need to again go and find third-party updates to ensure that we are covered there. Here's my citation page where I got most of my information on some of the quirks of Windows 10 and some of the advantages of Linux Mint. So now I'll move over to the demo portion of the presentation, and I'll actually show you what Linux Mint looks like and some of the applications that I chose for us to work with as well. Okay, so our operating system has booted. If you look, you can see that this looks very similar to Windows 10 and that you just can pretty much click anywhere on the screen and you can enter your password, and we're into the operating system. As you can see, once you put your password in, it comes up very quickly. And you can see that we have a very similar layout to Windows 10 in that we have our taskbar at the bottom, and we have our icons on the desktop, and we also have, if we click the menu button, which would pretty much be the start button if we were using Windows 10, and it gives us a layout of all of the applications and tools that we can use in the operating system. Specifically, this administration section is pretty much our control panel that would be in a Windows 10 system. And as you can see, we have similar options that we can select here, like printer management, driver manager, which would be similar to what we use in Windows called a device manager. We have our terminal where we can act directly with the terminal and input commands that way. And then we have all of our accessories that would normally be in Windows, like our text editors, our note takers, things like that. So this is very similar to Windows, and that's the main reason why I chose it. Not only similar in interface, but it actually seems to run a lot smoother than in Windows 10 setup. Now I'll move into the quick demos that I'm going to give on the tools that I chose for Taters. And I based these on some of the applications that the personnel might have gotten used to while they were using Windows XP. I feel that these would be a great replacement for that. And then there's also some new functionality here that may not have existed in Windows XP as well. So I'll start with Tomboy Notes. I picked this one because it's an awesome note-taking tool that allows you to group your notes based on what type of notebook you create. So in the interest of time, I've already created the notebook here, Taters Notes, and it's pretty simple to add notes to it. You can simply click File and New, and it brings up the screen for you to type in, whatever notes you want to take relating to the company. So I'm just going to type a quick verbiage here. But the really nice thing I found out about this application is this is autosave. So once you start typing here, the application automatically saves your progress and places it in your notebook so that you can retrieve that later. You also have a really nice search function where you can search for words that might be in your notes, and it'll pull up all of the notes that might have those specific keywords in it. So I think this is a great tool for some of the replacements in Windows XP like Notepad, maybe even Word to an extent if it was being used for taking notes. The next tool I want to look at is Google Chrome. I won't get too much into detail on this one because it's pretty straightforward and pretty much exactly the same as if what you would use if you were on a Windows system. But as you can see, it's pretty much the same. You can pull up web addresses like I've done here, and it auto saves any of the web addresses that you visited previously so you can get back to those quicker. It's just an all-around great, secure web browser that I thought would be very useful to the company. The third application that I thought I would install is Thunderbird Mail. And the reason I install this is because this is also one of the great Mozilla products that um, allows us to manage our mail system as it exists today. So with us moving away from XP, we would no longer use Microsoft Outlook. And I feel like this is a great replacement again because it looks quite similar to say what a Microsoft Outlook would look in Windows XP. So we still have the same interface over here to our left hand side. Where we can choose inbox, any spam mail, trash, things like that, the same options that we would have in Outlook. And then we have our preview window here. So I thought this was a great tool to include, not only for its similarities in its interface, but we can also point this to the same mail servers that Taters uses today. Third, we are also going to be losing our Microsoft Office suite. I thought I would install LibreOffice, and this is quite similar to Microsoft Office in that it offers the same suite of applications in order to conduct business. LibreOffice would be your Microsoft Office replacement. And we have the same options here where we can open a file and type out a Word document, or we can use the same interface to do what's similar to a Microsoft Excel sheet with the Calc spreadsheet, or we can do something similar to a Microsoft PowerPoint presentation with Impress presentation. And again, you can see that this looks very similar to Microsoft Office, and I don't think any of the personnel would have any issues picking up the functionality of these new programs. Finally, we have the backup tool. It's a really great way to keep track of your personal data and either restore it if it's been lost or back it up to ensure that it can be reacquired if something were to happen. In the interest of time, I won't complete this entire process, but if one were to click restore, it gives you the option to choose a backup point, which I created here back on the 2nd of March. So if I were to select that and open it, it would immediately begin to restore the files that were deleted or missed during that last backup period. So in conclusion, I feel that Linux Mint Cinnamon is a cost-effective and functional replacement to Windows 10. It requires less resources, is considerably cheaper to deploy, and its suite of applications, in my opinion, rivals those of Windows. Thank you for your time, and I hope this eases some of the concerns for Taters on the switch to Linux software.